Get your flu shot. We'll have details on these stories and others at 8:30.
As our trade relationship with the Americans continues to be threatened and Canada looks for alternatives, we've been reminded of the barriers that slow trade between provinces. Several interprovincial trade barriers are hindering the movement of goods and services and workers across our country. These barriers could be costing Canada billions in annual GDP. Wayne Pauman wrote a recent policy proposal on Build Canada. It's called Good in One Province, Good in All. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at a firm. And Wayne's on the line now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what drew you to this issue of interprovincial trade barriers?
Yeah, well, it's near and dear to my heart. Even though I work in technology now, I once did a PhD on international trade, and that was 20 years ago. And even then, we talked a lot about how Canada had all these great free trade agreements with the U.S. and countries around the world, but we didn't really have free trade inside of our country. And, you know, when I was looking at this again recently, I thought, my God, 20 years have gone by, and we really haven't solved these problems. And at a time when we're having external trade threats, which we've all been talking about lately, it just seems like a really good time for us to finally tackle these barriers that we have.
So as you see it, what are the problems, Wayne?
So Canada's supposed to have free trade. You know, it even says in the Constitution from 1867 that there will be no internal trade barriers. But then what happened over years and years is that the provinces have jurisdiction over many of their own regulations, you know, like trucking regulations or provincial credentials for different professions and so on. And as those developed over many decades, they were often not harmonized. And so what the result is that if you're a business in one province trying to do business with another province, you can face all these little barriers, all these 1,000 cuts that add up to the equivalent of tariffs, even though there are no tariffs, but it's like having tariffs, and it's a damper on the GDP that we could be generating as a country.
Do you have a good example of something that gets held up because of little minor differences between provinces?
Yeah, there's so many of these things, but one, for example, is that the weight limits on roads are not the same between provinces. So if you're driving a truck across roads, you could be legal in one province, and then you get to the provincial border and you're not legal in the next province. Or let's say your nursing credentials might work in one province but not another province. So that's a barrier to the labor moving around the country. Fruits and vegetable packaging rules are different in different provinces. There's barriers to dairy and eggs and meat products across provinces. There's so many of these things. And again, each one on its own doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you add it up across an economy of our size, it adds up to real trouble.
So then what are you proposing we do with it?
So what we really need to do is kind of seize the moment. It's not like these things are a secret. We've been talking about this. You can find papers on this going back decades.
Yeah.
But the thing is, once you kind of get in a room and say, okay, let's fix these things, the work is hard, right? You have to go through, you have to identify the barriers, you have to agree on what the common standards are going to be. Invariably, it involves some provinces giving up some of the control they have over their local regulations, and of course there's always going to be someone who is affected in a way that they don't like. But what I think we need to do is take the view of how do we make Canada stronger, how do we make the right long-term decision. And I think we need to use not let the place that's going to wait, right, the same thing. We all understand that now is the time when we need Canada's economy to be stronger, we need to come together, and we need to use it as a motivator to break down these barriers that when times are good, we just don't think as much about. So I think that's what we need to do.
So then are you thinking that you would like to see the leaders of the provinces and the territories gather in a room together and hammer out some new rules?
That's right. It really needs to be led by, the Council of the Federation. So the premiers together with the Fed have to come together and make some tough decisions. And this is, it's not like nothing's been done before. We had in 2017 the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which was meant to make a big step forward in this area. But what's often pointed out is that when you look at the agreement, there are hundreds of pages of exceptions and carve-outs that different provinces reserve for themselves to not have to fully comply with the agreement in those areas. The provinces need to sit down and have another look at this, in my view, and really sweep away a lot of those exceptions and get these barriers out of the way of workers and businesses and consumers.
So then, if there's a rule in one of the provinces and say they package, something to eat, should then the other provinces just automatically believe that those rules are good enough?
That is the single biggest thing we can do, right? If something is good to go in Nova Scotia or BC, it should be good to go in Ontario or Alberta. That is the fastest way. There's obviously more detail behind it in terms of where do we need to move to national standards, but the principle that if something is good in one province is good in all is a really important starting point.
All right. What would you say to the argument that this could compromise provincial autonomy?
So, it will involve some degree of provinces being willing to compromise and give up areas where they've had exclusive jurisdiction. But the question is, what is the right long-term decision for the country and what is going to make us overall the most prosperous? And then it's not all the costs all on one or two provinces, right? A province may have to make a concession in one area, but they'll have a gain in another area where another province is making a concession. And so I think people need to take the broad view of where Canada is going over multiple decades and not just focus on the narrow jurisdiction of each province.
So if provincial leaders were listening to you, how quickly do you think something like this could get done?
So I think that we could make some big steps quite quickly on eliminating some of those exemptions in the Canada Free Trade Agreement that I talked about and looking at what is the low-hanging fruit where mutual recognition of standards can happen quickly. And my understanding is that it started kind of some of this behind closed doors, but we've heard the premiers and the feds talking about this in recent days, and I really hope they're moving fast and will make it up.
Your proposal says that removing these barriers could increase Canada's GDP by up to $200 billion. How did you get to that number?
So that number is pretty widely cited. There's an economist at the University of Calgary called Trevor Toon, who is one of the national experts on this topic, and he has added up to what the full potential to be. Obviously, it would take time to get there. It would be an overnight thing. We would have to sweep away these barriers, and then the economy, as workers and businesses go about their day-to-day business, would have to adapt. But that's the kind of magnitude we could be talking about here, that we're leaving on the table that doesn't involve any reliance on another country, right? These are things that we have in our own house.
Okay, Wayne, really appreciate the time. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
It's Wayne Coleman, Chief Revenue Officer at a firm and author of the policy Good in One Province, Good in All. You can read more at buildcanada.com. It's 8:20.
كان فيديو عن وجود عاصفة ثلجية تضرب عند جنوب كندا. طبعا الطرق باينة نظيفة عشان ايه، يعني في سيارات قامت بإزالة الثلج من على الطرق. انما ايه زي ما احنا شايفين على جانب الطريق ايه في ثلج جمع على جانب الطريق. وجزاكم الله خيرا، لا تنسونا بالدعاء، عمل اعجاب بالفيديو والاشتراك في القناة، مشاركة الفيديو. لو ليك اي تعليق او اي اضافة نرجو في اسفل. وجزاكم الله خيرا، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اخوكم دكتور رضا خطاب.